The Second Coming of Christ Part 39. The Crucifixion. Greetings, our dear children. We will continue with our narrative, which will now come to the moment of Yeshua's execution. Everything that happened afterwards, although unreal, has been very inhuman and terrifying. Yeshua fully realized how low people had fallen. He observed that it gave them pleasure to see other people being tortured. He wondered what types of demons had taken over their consciousnesses, and how deeply their divine essence, the main part of the human being, had been hidden. He felt no pain when the executioner nailed him to the cross, nor did he hear the cries of the crowd. He was in a void, separated from this cruel world, but he still looked at the faces of the people surrounding the place of execution. In his view, he has entered the soul of each of them and seen the long road waiting for them and the difficult test they are destined to go through. He realized how much pain they would endure before they learned to love and sympathize, which meant that they would ascend themselves from God's particles. He asked the Father to help these fallen souls clear their filth, clear their conscience, restore their humanity and put them on the right track. Then he collapsed, as if Jesus' bystanders could no longer stand this terrible place, and left the earth plane for a period of time. When he woke up, he saw that the public party was over and the place was empty. His favorite disciples, including Judas, took his lifeless body from the cross. Judas' face was distorted by so much pain and pain. At that time, Jesus felt the deep remorse he experienced in his soul and hoped to hold him in his arms and comfort him like a child. Next to them, he saw the tears of the woman, Mary and Mary's mother. Jesus assumed Pilate would allow them to remove his body from the cross and take him to a safe place without letting wild animals torture him. He saw how they spread it on a thick blanket and slowly took it to the narrow streets of Jerusalem, illuminated by moonlight. Everything happened under the cloak of the night so as not to attract people's attention. He was transported to the cave where the deathbed was prepared with several layers of fir branches and covered with quilts. There is a pot of pure water to wash his body. When his beloved wife gently and thoroughly washed his body, his disciples stood there, occasionally covering his injured face and hands with kisses. Her beloved mother stood there. She had stopped crying, but her face seemed to turn into a stone of sadness and pain. After the purification was completed, Mary Magdalene asked everyone to leave her alone with Jesus until morning. She saw her mother wrapping her in a warm shawl and coming out of the cave behind her disciples. Jesus couldn't help admiring his beautiful wife. Her face was lit up by the flame of the candle, expressing so much sweetness and sadness, love and sympathy, which seemed to be the embodiment of women on earth. Mary stared at him, waiting for him to fulfill the promise he had made to her before saying goodbye and return to her after his death. Then Jesus collected all his subtle bodies from the higher vibrational space and concentrated them on a powerful energy mass, filtering out the invisible membrane separating him from the third dimension and entering his lifeless body. The Second Coming of Christ Part 40. Resurrection. Therefore, in our narration, we are close to the part that reveals the miracle of Jesus' resurrection. After moving into his body, Jesus was able to revive the material carrier of his soul's life on earth in those years. From a human point of view, this process cannot be explained. Of course, he received the help of all the highest authorities, Agatha citizens, his star family and his spiritual godfather. But the main character is still Jesus, who is aware of all the tragedies on earth. He also noticed that human beings fall into the depth of lower vibration energy, which separates human beings from divine nature.
Therefore, he tried his best to enter his body for the last time until he finally completed his mission on earth. He seems to have accepted all the pain, fear and despair that have plunged people into cruel situations, which will mean that they will be born again and again on this painful planet. His beloved beautiful planet became very precious to him, and he was trapped in the network of dark forces that enslaved people's consciousness. He is prepared to do anything to shake and awaken these lost souls from their spiritual sleep and help them remember who they are. What happened next left such an impression on people's consciousness. Even today, the echo of these events still exists in their souls. Mary, holding Jeshua's hand, suddenly felt that she was beginning to warm up, and then her fingers experienced a slight tremor. She was afraid to walk and alienated her feelings, but soon she realized that this was not her imagination and that her beloved husband really survived. The first light of dawn was already felt, and she could stare at Jesus, Surprisingly, his wound has healed, leaving only a small scar and no bleeding. His body slowly warmed up. Finally, he opened his eyes, smiled at him and said to him, "You see, dear, I have fulfilled my promise." Mary fell into his arms and they hugged her for a long time until she completely calmed down. Jesus told her what he felt and saw. She thanked the Father and all the higher powers who helped him avoid physical suffering, although she also understood the kind of spiritual suffering he had to endure. With the first ray of sunshine, his closest disciples entered the cave, and Judas was among them. They came to the prepared land for the funeral ceremony. They were surprised to see Jesus alive and healthy, wearing the long white robe prepared by Mary. The disciples ran to him and finally realized that their master had been resurrected. They began to beg him to show himself to people so that he could witness the miracle, because they knew very well that they would not believe him. Jesus fulfilled his plea. He realized how important it was to spread rumors of his resurrection as much as possible. This is that as many people as possible will know and remember that nothing is impossible for a person who lives and breathes with love, even praying for the lost soul on the verge of death, and these souls will send him to execution. The Second Coming of Christ, Part 41 Ascension. Therefore, everyone found Yeshua safe and sound, with no signs of torture on her body. The news of his resurrection spread throughout Jerusalem. His disciples walked the streets sharing the blessed news and inviting people to the homily that Yeshua was going to give on a small hill, not far from the cave in which he had risen. Not all people believed in these messengers, but most saw the excited and inspired faces of the men who broke the news, and they followed them anyway, and little by little a large crowd gathered at the foot of the hill. Yeshua climbed the hill, looked at the faces of the people around him and recognized many of them from when they had witnessed his execution. He was happy because he knew that they were the ones who needed his words the most. His post-resurrection homily differs greatly from the many others that have been spoken throughout the land of Judea. It was not much, but it included all the knowledge he had, all the experience he had gained, including the miserable death on the cross. When he began to speak, there was silence and the people around him seemed to hold their breath. He spoke with a calm, melodious and confident voice. At the same time he was full of love, tenderness, kindness and forgiveness without limits, so much so that many did not realize that they had begun to cry. Some of the witnesses to his execution fell to their knees and begged for forgiveness. Yeshua asked them to stand up and told them that he had nothing to forgive, that they were gods like him, but that their consciousness was weakened and they did not know what they had done. He explained that his sincere contrition was the key to opening up to a different world, free of anger, hatred and cruelty. A world ruled by love, good and forgiveness that every human being has at the bottom of his heart. These wonderful thoughts and emotions have been locked in by the dark forces of the reptilians, who have taken on a human appearance. The reptiloids have seized the power of the planet and have enslaved the human consciousness by establishing programs for the generation of low-frequency energy, because that is the only thing they could and can eat. Yeshua's words were clear and simple enough to penetrate the soul of the people, with the truth of his words that were beyond all doubt. They believed with all their hearts that he was an envoy from heaven who came to earth only to give them divine truth, to help them earn dignity and love for themselves, for others and for all who live under the sun. All were perfectly blessed. The Lord himself seemed to have come down to earth with his love and light to dissolve all the dirt and darkness accumulated in the souls of humans. He transformed them into the angels that would pour out the divine purity of heaven that, at that moment, they were having the opportunity to meet. When Yeshua felt that people were blessed and saw his miraculous transformation, he understood that his mission on earth was over, that he had done the best of himself, and that it was time to leave once and for all. He would assist them from the subtle level of earth, from where he could see and hear every soul, supporting them in their despair and helping them preserve the immortal divine particle, priceless, that every human being possesses. Yeshua gradually dissolved into the air and disappeared before the astonished crowd that was watching this. The Second Coming of Christ, Part 42. The Legacy of Yeshua. Yeshua's followers turned out to be right about the fact that hundreds of people saw their master's resurrection and the subsequent ascension. After listening to his wonderful sermon, this played a decisive role in the awakening of the people and the rebirth of their consciousness. The news of this miracle quickly began to spread not only in the land of Judea, but throughout the world, because the country was located at the intersection of many ancient roads that led to Europe, Asia and Africa.
As is common among people, the accounts of the miracles created by Yeshua have been embellished with many details that give them even more weight. In this way, Yeshua facilitated the work, not only for his disciples, but also for those who carried his teaching and kept it up to this day. The priests of Agartha and God the Father were right when they said that people needed a miracle to be realized in their divinity. This miracle was demonstrated by Yeshua, the Son of God, who had come to earth with the greatest mission of awakening humanity from a dream that has lasted centuries. More than once, Yeshua appeared before his disciples, his beloved wife and mother, to support them with his guidance and love. Her mother soul had absorbed into herself, during her stay on earth, a very unique experience. This later allowed her to begin the great service to the people. From the subtle plane of the earth she has been able to help all the souls who asked her and sought her help. She warmed them with her love and revived their divine consciousness. Of course, she also helped her other half, her twin flame, her beloved Maria, to honorably complete their own portion of service on earth. Her son remained in India, who had learned to love her with all her heart. From his mother's stories, he knew all about him, but he preferred to teach people not about Christianity, but about Buddhism that had entered his soul from the first years of his life. He was very successful in his Buddhist studies, spent a lot of time in Tibetan monasteries, and was quite a famous person in India at the time. Mary and her daughter returned to Italy, the homeland of Mary, and later settled in France, where they transmitted divine knowledge to people until the end of their lives. Mother Mary was close to them. She had buried her husband a long time ago and nothing stopped her in this country where the sad memories of the execution of her son were still fresh. She had become a true Christian and helped all those in need, sparing no time or effort. Judas's fate was the saddest, because, despite his sincere repentance and the forgiveness of his master, he could not bear the remorse of his conscience and hanged himself in a moment of despair. Many of Yeshua's followers paid with their lives for their devotion to the faith and their role in spreading the teaching of Christ, as Yeshua was called after death. The fate of the teaching of Christ was no less sad, because its essence was greatly distorted. Today we will stop here. In the next publication we will continue talking to you. We are the Absolute Father and the Mother of the Universe. We love you without measure. We have spoken to you through Marta.
The dissemination and circulation of this message are highly recommended. The time has come to radiate on a larger scale these new energies, carriers of joy,